The major topic that was discussed here yesterday was the problems of scientific management. We opened the discussion, the first problem, by using the example of cotton mill. So in cotton mill, the workers, uh, their main job was to tie the thread. If it gets broken, they work at the opposite ends of an aisle of a spinning machine, and if the thread gets broken, their job is to tie them again. And they were supposed to do this for a full year, 8 hours per day. And this brings us to the main problem of scientific management, that the task is so trivial, and doing it repetitively leads to boredom. Then we went on to discuss two more examples from the IT giant IBM. In the first example, we discussed how IBM chairman Watson was on a routine round, and he saw a woman sitting idle. On asking her the reason, she said that she is waiting for the second person to arrive. When when Mr. Watson asked her that why is she not, why didn't she do it themselves, she replied that she can do it, but she's not supposed to do. And this implies that the idea that scientific management pushed the idea of division, pushed it too harshly by differentiating two tasks into setting and running and then assigning two different people. It actually slows down the system. A better approach could be to integrate it and to give a more autonomy to the lady. The second example, which was discussed, was also from IBM. In the example, there is a significant delay by the designers at the IBM company to design a calculator. The management decided to actually let the workers finish up the job and manufacture the calculator. What the management later found out was that the emerged good was much better than what would have been if the designers would have made it. And this implication can best be expressed using quote, hand is the cutting edge of mind. Planning and doing are not different things. Any process that leads to a difference, which does not really use a person's specific abilities in the form of integration, measuring, balance, and judgment, actually would become monotonous after a time. One more major problem that we discussed can be viewed in the terms of contact. The assumption of scientific management was that there is an expanding production base. And this assumption works fine when there is a market which is completely ready for the product. There's an expanding market, but the assumptions fail the moment there is a recession and there is no demand in the market. And the example of Ford cars can be taken. During Great Depression, when people didn't even have money to buy their daily wages, who would buy cars? They didn't have money. And this meant that because of mass production, there were more cars, but no buyers. We also briefly discussed about how the scientific management, the idea of scientific management was influenced by the society. We discussed urban migration, increase in the income, 60% of the income of the people. We also discussed exploitation in the coal mines, etc. At last, we discussed that all these schools of thoughts that we study are not wrong, but they are actually incomplete. And as we future managers, we need to understand pros and cons of each and have an holistic understanding of the management. Moreover, we need to be willing to ask questions such as, is man only an economic man or is he also a social man? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aram. Now, Riza.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Riza.
Yes, sir. So, shall I start?
Please.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Riza Hayat, and today I'm going to present before you a glimpse of the discussion which was held on yesterday. So, sir, am I allowed to share my screen?
Yes, why not?
Just a second. So is it visible?
Yes, visible.
Okay, so in the earlier classes, we were discussed about the scientific school of management thought as one of the most renowned and the first ever organized school of management. The basic ideology of the scientific school of management depends on the concept of standardization, that is, the division of labor, in which a worker is supposed to do a particular job repeatedly on a continuous basis. The workers were selected on the basis of various jobs description provided, and they are trained scientifically with the help of time and motion studies. Primarily, the incentives are given on in financial terms in order to achieve cooperation, and the key element here is the disintegration between the planning and the doing aspects, as they both are considered as different jobs to be done separately by individual personnel. Frederick Winslow Taylor is known as the father of scientific management. But talking about its criticism, various evaluators criticized it on different grounds. So first, look it up from the point of view of worker. Now, as per the norms of scientific management, it is visible that a full-fledged job is broken down into various tasks. Every task assigned to a particular job was so trivial that its regular performance makes it boring and dull for the workers performing them. Sir elaborated this point with the help of a few examples. The first one was of a cotton mill where two workers were kept in the process of thread making. The first one was asked to have an eye on the thread moving, and the second one had to prevent thread breaking. And obviously, performance of such types of jobs 24 into 7, and if not for 24 into 7, for the entire working hours, turn out to be boring. The second example was of the former chairman of IBM, Mr. Watson's experience with one of her subordinates, who was sitting idle when he came across to her and not performing the task of setting up of machinery. And when she was asked to provide an explanation for, she simply replied that she was not supposed to do the job of installation, rather she was interested with the job of running the machinery only, although she was well versed with the knowledge of how to set it up, but she was not allowed to do so. Hence, lack of holistic feeling pervades among the workers. Now these are the viewpoints from workers point of view. Now let's look it up from the context part. Now the context part also makes scientific management less applicable. The reason is that it is based on the presumption that the market will definitely be an expanding mass market, but the situation in reality is not always true. What if we are producing goods which have no or lesser demand, and what will be the situations under cyclical depression? All these answers will be provided by another example provided by the sir of the period of World War First, and the Great Depression afterwards, whereby it is visibly irrelevant to produce more and more cars, as who would buy a car during emergencies? Or were there enough buyers in the society? Obviously, no, because people were more prone to fulfill their basic necessities rather than running for luxuries in emergency situations. So, this broad based market assumption also turned out to be unhealthy for scientific management. Now, these were the basic major remarks made on the critique part of scientific management, and we can infer from them that though scientific management was a successful school of thought, as apparently it increased productivity by up to 60%, and also it provides us with the reflection of the society at that era or at that time, and it also builds a specialization among the workers and increases their efficiency and working capability. But the drastic disintegration between the planning and directing concept, as they both are considered as the opposite end of the same job, and the unnecessary division of labor lacks its scope, because man is not only an economic man, rather he or she is more of a social man who needs some affiliation, some variations and challenges in his work in order to feel more in order to develop sense of belonging and interest in his work. Now this is all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Reza.
Thank you so much, sir.
So, we shall first comment on those who introduced themselves, beginning with Saad Abdullah. There were two. Have you been in the same class, Saad Abdullah and Faisal Jamal?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
We have been classmates. Okay. So, oh, yes, mechanical engineering and MBA makes a very good combination, and you have rightly noted that both of you have good opportunities to be techno managers. But do focus because in that also there are a lot of options that are emerging. Like for example, Faisal, you talked about the solar panels and you did a research paper on that. Hmm? So that is one area. Auto industry is naturally one of the mm, happening sector always, and that also provides good scope for mechanical engineers plus MBAs. So as regards your communication skills, Faisal, maybe you have to slightly focus more on the clarity of delivery. Hmm? You tend to speak in a manner as if, I mean, one has to struggle to get to your talk. Hmm? So improve, maybe practice at your own end. Make sure that you deliver with the right kind of modulations and pacing, especially. Pacing is very important because if you are slightly fast paced and low pitch, then it becomes difficult to comprehend. Okay, so make sure that you do it. And
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Akhil has lived his life responsibly in the sense I like sports persons especially because sports, as he very rightly said, it teaches you many things. It teaches you persistence. It teaches you discipline. It also teaches you to face failures, isn't it? So, which is an inbuilt part of life. And presently, he is struggling with this injury. And I hope he gets well soon and again gets going on that front. And accordingly, he has framed his career goals also. He wants to get into defense. So, overall, I was impressed by his introduction. Then I think Dayam also did a very good job. Especially, I liked the way he is testing his technical skills in the marketplace, and especially his exposure to corporate IT sector. And I know Cognizant is a very prominent IT company. So, if he is already having an engagement with them, that will do good to his career, and he will inshallah improve on his IT skills along with the management skills. So overall, I'm impressed by the four introductions that we have had. In fact, today we had good quality recap presentations also, both by Arham and Riza Hayat. They did a reasonably good job, and they covered the content quite comprehensively. In fact, all the points that were discussed, they were covered by both Arham and Riza Hayat, and I hardly recall any point which was discussed in the class and was not mentioned. So well done, Arham and Riza, on that account. Maybe
Thank you
Arham,
so much, sir.
maybe Arham, in your delivery, we were talking about monotony and boredom. So um, try to bring some variety in your delivery, isn't it? You tend to speak at a uniform pitch and pace, and so if you bring some modulations, and with some pauses at the right moment, that will improve the quality of your delivery. Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay.
And Riza, you have very good command over language and you spoke with confidence. And it was a very lucid presentation. I have only one suggestion regarding your PPTs, especially the headings of the PPT slides. My personal preference is to avoid all caps format for headings. The reason being that all caps are, that font is less readable. So if you, have, maybe you can vary the font size, isn't it? You can make it bold, but don't use all caps.
Okay, sir. I'll take care of
Otherwise,
it.
otherwise it was well done. Your slides were also very good, and you presented the ideas in a very, it was a very fluent presentation. Well done.
Thank you, sir.
Now coming to extending that discussion that we are having, and we did point out some limitations of scientific management school, but in no way we are belittling the importance of scientific management. In fact, this approach will always be required in any job which is of repetitive nature. And the way, Taylor actually took up this challenge is worth appreciating and acknowledging. So we are criticizing both from the inside as also from the outside. Inside in the sense that yes, at times it does create monotony and boredom. But I don't know whether, sometimes what happens is that the practitioners of the concept are more loyal than the king, and they push the notion of division of labor rather too heavily, which may not be the original intent of the proponent. In fact, when Taylor was criticized to the extent that even in the parliament, this question was raised that his system is anti labor, and he was asked to give a testimony. And I have read that speech which he delivered. It is one of the most, powerful exposition of the idea. And he ends on a note. In fact, in one of the experiment that he describes there, they were working on the design of a cutting tool, and there were two alloys that had identified. They will mix, and then they will use different combination of that. I mean, there were as many as 11 variables which were at play in that experiment, and they would keep one variable constant. Like for example, they found out that if you have a cutting tool and it has to cut a metal, so if you throw a stream of water at the intersecting point, it reduces the friction and you are likely to have a better job of cutting the metal. Likewise, there were 11 variables, and they would keep 10 variables constant, and one variable they would change, and then they would find out the best combination for that particular variable. And likewise, they would experiment with others. So this experiment of finding out the ideal cutting tool took him 28 years. The experiment lasted for 28 years. So you can imagine the kind of commitment and involvement he has. I mean, this has become a passion for him, which is always the case with all the inventors, all those crusaders who work for an idea. In fact, I remember the last part of his speech where he says he draws a parallel between an exponent of a scientific management thought and the modern day surgeon. And he says that modern day surgeon is the best example of a scientific management expert. And he says it is pertinent to understand how he teaches to his interns this art of surgery. Suppose a person's leg is to be amputated. Will he say that do it the way you like? Can he take that route? Never ever. The surgeon would say, first learn my way, which I have learned the hard way. Once you have mastered my way, then you have a right to invent upward. So he said, actually, there is no originality in scientific management. I have been classed as one who proposed it and who is the father of scientific management and all that. But actually, I trust me on that. It is not an original idea. There is no originality in scientific management. My only job is I have pooled together the common wisdom which already existed in the workers. It was disorganized. I have just put it together. And he said, any person who thinks his creativity above the world's creativity is a very poor person. I am not creative. The workers are creative. They invent new ways. I systematize it. So such was the crusader behind the this school of management thought. But as it happens that, like for example, we have heard about, we have discussed about Henry Ford, who was one of the exponent of this idea of scientific management. And sometimes what happens is that these practitioners they push the idea too far. It so happened that there is an incident which conveys the mindset of these practitioners of assembly line technology. Uh, and this has gone so much into their head that on one occasion it is said that when they were celebrating a technological breakthrough that they had in the company, they organized a lunch for all the staff in the factory. And you'll be surprised that the lunch was served on a conveyor belt. So scientific management has become a kind of part of their life so much that they pushed this notion too far. So I don't know whether that was the original intent of Taylor, but it was practiced in such a manner by these practitioners. And that is why, like for example, I said, yes, analyzing the job, identifying all the meaningful tasks that are to be performed in that job is a very important analysis. But pulling, dividing it into parts, does that mean that we can't put it together again and make a complete whole of that job? Did Taylor stop that? So sometimes, uh, again, I use that expression, we are more loyal than the king. And that creates the problem. And this is what happened with scientific management. And yes, I have already shared with you the context, how the context changed. And that also, exposed the limitations of scientific approach and this production oriented approach where your entire focus is on increasing the productivity. And especially this world war and the great depression, that was one of the major reasons which exposed the limitations of scientific management. And what would happen when you are producing and producing and there are enough there are no takers for that product? What will happen ultimately? There would be huge inventory pile up. And actually workers started this feeling that what will happen generally with in such a situation when you have more production than required? What
So
will be the management's
profits might
response?
so profits might increase. Like profit was also one of the ultimate goals, or can be considered as an ultimate goal of these people who believed in scientific school of management. Can it,
Fine.
along with productivity?
Fine. But what will be the end result if you have a depression in the economy, if you have a recession in the economy,
So
and you have
people
to
won't be
reach?
Unemployment.
willing to buy the product,
So
and
unemployment.
eventually,
So
Yes, it will
inflation will be
increase.
there. Inflation will be there.
What will be its impact on the worker who are working hard to get maximum output?
they
Ultimately,
would.
they realize what somebody said, unemployment. Actually, they realized that by working hard, they are throwing themselves out of the job, because when there would be enough production and there would be huge inventory pile up, what will be the end result? The management will ask these workers to leave the job or at least take the temporary break. So they realize that by working hard, actually, they are throwing themselves out of the job. What we call in the modern day parlance, showing the pink slip. So many workers started losing the jobs because extra production was not required. So this was the second change which occurred, that workers started losing the jobs. And what will happen in that situation when the workers and a large group of workers start losing their jobs? What is the normal reaction? The normal reaction in such a case is that workers will protest. And workers started protesting. And you know that 1920s is the period of labor movements world over. In India also, the first trade union was established in 1925, All India Trade Union Congress. So world over, there was a revulsion against this system, whereby when you report for work in the morning and you are asked to quit as you are no longer needed. So this was one of the major, you know, uh, other development, the large macro developments, if we can talk about. First, the Great Depression, the World War, and second, workers attempt to organize themselves against this injustice which was meted out to them, because they said they have worked hard all through. If the management is not able to sell the product, it is their problem. We did what we were asked to do, and this was the second development. There was a third development also, which was a very specific development, and this actually is the base of the second school of management thought, which we are going to discuss, the human relations school, the second school which came into being. These experiments actually are called Hawthorne experiments. The name is a bit strange and queer, but it is Hawthorne is a place in US where we had a factory of General Electric Company. So there also uh, a group of experiments were started, which were like any scientific management experiment. And the experiment was like this, that they wanted to see the impact of illumination, the intensity of light on production. And their normal assumption was that what we call the hypothesis with which they started. The hypothesis was that if there will be better intensity of light, there will be better production, which is the normal thing to expect, isn't it? If you have more light, you will have its positive impact on the productivity. So, as it happens in such experiments, that two groups were formed, the control group and the experimental group. In the control group, the intensity of the light was maintained at a uniform level. But in the experimental group, it was changed. And it was started from a very low level of light. Then its intensity was increased, brought to a very good level, and from there it was again reduced. So what was the expectation? The expectation was that as illumination would go up, the productivity would also go up, and it actually happened like this. But then there was a strange thing which happened after that point. When the illumination was reduced, the productivity did not go down. Actually, it continued to rise. Now they were sort of in a fix. What is happening? Because they expected that with the reduced light, the productivity should go down, but it didn't happen like this. And they mulled over that issue, but they could not resolve it. And they said, "Okay, some fluke, something is happening. We don't know." And actually, the experiments were dropped altogether. In fact, there was another thing which was happening side by side in the control group, where the level of illumination was maintained at a constant level. There also the productivity was rising continuously. So they at least understood this, that actually illumination has no impact on productivity. Something else is impacting productivity. What is that? They were not able to understand. And the experiments were almost dropped because they were not making any sense. And at that point of time, this fellow who is now credited as the father of human relations movement, Elton Mayo got involved in the experiments, and he tried to make sense of what is happening. And rather than just monitoring the productivity, he decided to have a word with the workers to understand what is happening. So he went down to shop floor level, discussed with these groups what was happening and why it was happening like this. And in those interactions, he came to realize, he got this realization that actually they said what is causing a change in productivity is the sense of importance that they have got from this. Actually, then when he found out what was the design of the experiment, he said that these workers were taken out from their routine surroundings because an experiment was to be performed. So they were brought to a particular place, and they were studied, or their work was studied. He said this novelty of the experience, the very fact that they were taken out from their routine work surroundings and subjected to a study, and naturally the supervisors here were the researchers actually who were monitoring their performance. So they were not their usual supervisors who would reprimand them, or who would be breathing down on their neck. It was a far more humane supervision. So in a nutshell, what they said was, it is the sense of importance that they got through these experiments which actually is responsible for increase in productivity. Does it make sense? Hmm. Yes. So this, in fact, this is what they call the sense of importance they got. That what they are doing is worth studying. And then the supervision could be so humane. And then they developed a kind of bondness also when they were working together for quite some period. In fact, these experiments lasted not 1 year. It lasted 9 years. So they have become, very close knit, and the social bonding. In fact, I have just very simplified the experiment. There were series of experiments that were conducted. In fact, in one of the experiment, they noted that because of the social bonding, when there was a temptation to increase the productivity, they did not increase the productivity to protect the weaker workers, lest they are exposed and they become the kind of deviant of the system, that they are not able to increase the productivity. So, in order to protect weak workers, the strong workers compromise their additional earnings. So, from this, actually, Alton Mayo proposed this idea that what we have discussed in the previous class, that man is not just an economic man, man is a social man. He wants to be a part of the group. His primary nature is gregarious. He is a social person. He loves to be a part of the group. And if you provide a work setting where this aspiration can be met, that actually is responsible for increase in productivity. Not the technical factors per se, like intensity of light. Is it? So these three developments, actually, what I've described, the two macro developments and one this unique experiment, actually led to the emergence of second school of management thought, which we call the human relations school. Okay, so we stop here, and when we meet next time, we will discuss how this human relations school underwent further changes, and from human relations school, it began to be called as behavioral school of management. And because of contribution of persons like Maslow, who said that it is not just social nature of man. Actually, there are so many other things also. And you all would come to know, or many of you might know it, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which
Yes,
he
sir.
proposed, and where he talked about the lower order needs and the higher order needs. So the human relations school actually got transformed and got further extended, and it began to be called behavioral school, where whose idea was that man is not just a social man, man is a complex man, and at various points of time he is guided by a variety of needs, which are arranged in a hierarchy, starting from let us say the basic physiological needs to social needs, then is to esteem needs, and finally to self-actualization needs. Okay. So at the lowest level, you have physiological needs. Then you have security needs. You want to be sure of your of fulfillment of your physiological needs, not only here and now, but in future also. So you will go for a job, let us say, which offers you pensionary benefits because you value security. But then, yes, what the human relations school said, social need is an important need. And then, once you are part of a social group, you want to be a distinct part of that social group, and that is esteem need. You want that the group should recognize you as somebody. But finally, what gives you the final kick all through your life is the self actualization need. You want to become what you are capable of becoming. So man is what we call Ashraful Makhluqat, the best creature of Almighty, isn't it? And we are blessed with unique talents. So ultimately, what gives us the final kick is this realization of our true potential. So this is what is called the behavioral school of management. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, sir.